I can still hear the sound, the kind that splits a room in half when my father's palm cracked against my face at my brother's birthday party. The slap was so hard that my earring flew from my ear and clattered onto the marble floor, rolling beneath the dessert table while every guest froze with forks midair. The sting spread across my cheek like fire, and for a moment I could taste iron in my mouth. Not from blood, but from the sharp bite where my teeth caught the inside of my lip. I stumbled sideways into a chair, nearly knocking it over, and the room gasped in unison. My mother did not rush to comfort me. She smiled thin and sharp and hissed for everyone to hear. "This is what happens when a daughter forgets her duty. You think you are above family, but you are nothing without us." The words landed harder than the slap. In that instant, I realized they had planned this humiliation. My brother stared into his wineglass. His wife pulled their golden son closer as though I were a threat. Whispers rose like smoke. She refused to babysit. Can you imagine? She embarrassed them in front of everyone. Some guests raised their phones, recording the moment, eager for scandal rather than justice. I pressed my palm to my burning cheek, feeling it swell under my touch. The chandelier above fractured the light into blinding shards as if the universe itself wanted me to see that I no longer belonged in this picture. My knees trembled, but I refused to fall. I refused to cry, even as tears stung my eyes. I lifted my chin and looked straight at my parents. Their expressions were triumphant, not ashamed. They wanted the world to see me broken. They wanted proof that I was ungrateful, that I was difficult, that I would never measure up to the golden boy or his perfect child. But deep inside, beneath the humiliation, a vow was forming. They thought this slap was an ending, but I knew it was the start of something they could not control. The night would not end with me as their scapegoat. It would end with the truth tearing through the lies they had wrapped around themselves for years. It was supposed to be a celebration, a night filled with music and laughter. Yet even before the slap, I had already felt the weight of being out of place. My brother's 40th birthday was planned like a royal affair. The invitations were embossed with gold lettering, the valet line stretched down the cul-de-sac, and the catering staff moved like a choreographed dance through the glowing rooms. I arrived in my modest sedan, polished clean, but modest all the same, and the valet gave me a quick nod before sliding behind the wheel. Around me, BMWs and Teslas glimmered beneath the string lights. Inside the house, the air carried the scent of cedar-planked salmon roasted vegetables and champagne that never stopped flowing. My brother, the golden boy of our family, stood at the center of it all, a man elevated not just by his career, but by the endless adoration of my parents. He was their pride, their living monument, and in their eyes he could do no wrong. I wore a simple navy dress, one I had owned for years, paired with pearl studs from college. There were no designer labels hanging from me, no flashy jewelry announcing status. I held a neatly wrapped gift, a fountain pen set I thought he might like, but as soon as I stepped onto the porch and heard the laughter spill out, I felt myself shrink. At the door, a young man with a clipboard smiled politely. "Name?" he asked. "Keziah," I answered. His smile faltered. "You're listed as +1 under the Reynolds family block." He even showed me the chart. Lazaro, my brother, stood proudly at the top. My parents, my cousins, even distant relatives had their names spelled out carefully. Mine was absent. In its place was a small note +1 guest of family. I forced a laugh, pretending it did not sting. "Guess I'm lucky to be the guest," I said. He offered to handwrite a new tag, but I waved him off. The badge he gave me was plain white generic, the kind you pin to a stranger. I fastened it above my heart, feeling the fabric pull, as though even the cloth resisted my presence. I walked in, greeted by chandeliers dangling like floating planets, every crystal scattering light across the silk-draped tables. My seat card led me to table 18, nearly hidden behind a pillar near the kitchen doors, where servers shouted hot plate as they rushed past. My place setting was crooked. The napkin drooped into a limp fold, like it had given up before the night even began. I straightened it with trembling fingers, the tiny swan shape collapsing under the draft of the swinging kitchen door. From that corner, I could see little of the head table, but I could hear everything. Guests toasted Lazaro's success, calling him the pride of the Reynolds family. My parents beamed, repeating again and again, "This is our son, our golden boy, our legacy." Each word was a knife twisting slowly, reminding me I had no such place in their story. I remembered times when I had been erased before, the family Christmas card where my image had been cropped out, the graduation dinner where no one mentioned my name. Even the framed photos in the living room showed only Lazaro's milestones. There was no evidence of my sacrifices. I had lent him money during his lean years, spent weekends editing his presentations, even stayed overnight in his office when he was struggling to launch. Yet, in this carefully curated version of history, I had become invisible. As I sipped water, my father's gaze swept over me. He did not wave or smile. He simply nodded as though acknowledging an employee rather than a daughter, then turned back to his business partner. My mother, Delora, floated around like a queen, greeting guests with perfect poise. When she introduced Lazaro, she placed a hand on his shoulder and announced his promotion as though she were unveiling a king. Not once did she glance in my direction. The alienation thickened like smoke. A cousin leaned in and whispered to her friend, "That's the sister, the one without kids. She never really helps." Their words were not meant for me, yet they reached me all the same, carving another notch into the wall between me and the family I had been born into. Even the children sensed it. Lazaro's son, the golden grandson, toddled by clutching a balloon. Everyone clapped and cooed as if he were royalty on parade. My mother knelt to kiss him, her eyes bright with adoration, the kind she had never given me. She lifted him onto her hip and announced proudly, "This boy will carry our name forward. He is our treasure." Guests laughed and applauded. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, my badge reading +1 pressing against my chest like a brand. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, some clerical error in the seating chart, but deep down I knew better. This was a message. I did not belong here, not as a daughter, not as a sister, not even as a guest. My brother's wife Thessaly caught my eye once. She looked away quickly, her lips pressed tight, as though she pitied me but dared not show it. The distance between us was more than physical. It was the silence of someone who had chosen a side long before. I thought of leaving, then slipping out quietly before dessert, but something held me in place. Perhaps it was stubbornness, perhaps a faint hope that I might be proven wrong, that I might still be acknowledged as part of this family. But the minutes ticked on, the laughter rose higher, and every sound reminded me that I was nothing more than an afterthought. My parents had built this narrative carefully. Lazaro, the golden boy, his son, the golden heir, and me, the shadow they could use or discard as needed. As the night wore on, I began to realize that the slap when it came was not a random act. It was the climax of a story they had been writing for years, and I had been cast as the outsider from the very beginning. The clinking of glasses cut through the music as the lights dimmed just slightly, and the host's voice echoed across the ballroom calling for attention. A spotlight swept across the stage where a microphone stood waiting. I felt my chest tighten when I heard my name announced. "Please welcome a few words from someone very dear to the family, Keziah Reynolds." My fork stilled above my plate. I had not prepared a speech, had not been told I would be called. My heart thudded as the spotlight landed on me, exposing me, though I was hidden behind the pillar. Chairs scraped. People turned, and a wave of expectation rolled toward me. I forced myself to stand, smoothing the wrinkles from my dress, as I walked slowly to the stage, each step echoing against marble. My heels clicked in rhythm with my pulse. When I reached the microphone, I squinted against the glare, searching for some guidance, a card, anything. My brother Lazaro gave me a stiff nod, not encouragement, not support, but acknowledgement of a pawn stepping onto the board. My mother's smile was polished and brittle, her eyes sharp beneath the glitter of charm. I leaned into the microphone, my lips parting, but before a sound emerged, the screen behind me flickered to life. A video montage began to play. Childhood pictures of Lazaro filled the screen, his baseball uniform, his science fair project, his graduation, his first office, his wedding, each image paired with words of adoration. From the very beginning, my mother's voice narrated, Lazaro was destined for greatness. He was our pride, our light, our legacy. My father's voice followed deep and proud. We always knew he had that spark, the brilliance you cannot teach. The audience murmured their approval, clapping as the golden grandson appeared in the final clips, sitting on Lazaro's shoulders, holding balloons showered in confetti. The words, "A legacy in the making," bloomed in gold cursive across the screen. Not one image of me appeared. Not one mention of my sacrifices, the money I had lent, the nights I had stayed to help, the silent support I had given. My existence had been scrubbed clean. My hands clasped tightly in front of me to keep from shaking. When the applause faded, my mother rose gracefully and joined me on stage, her hand lightly brushing my arm. "And now," she said brightly, a few words from the ever-thoughtful sister. The audience leaned forward. I felt every eye pierce me, waiting for a speech I had never agreed to give. I forced a breath, leaned closer to the mic, and whispered, "It is a beautiful night. Lazaro, you have always had a gift for lighting up the room." But before I could continue, my mother laughed loudly, interrupting. "Oh, honey, wouldn't it be the perfect gift if you offered to help Lazaro and Thessaly with their son full-time? You know, babysitting. What could be more meaningful than that?" The words slammed into me harder than any slap. The room stilled silence, falling heavy and brittle. A few gasps fluttered. Someone dropped a fork. My father's booming voice followed, sealing the trap. "Come on, Keziah, it's just family. You do not even have kids. You should be helping those who do." Laughter rippled awkwardly among the guests, some clapping uncertainly, others whispering to one another. I felt my chest constrict, my throat dry. "This was not agreed on," I said into the mic, sharper than I intended. A wave of murmurs spread, some sympathetic, others mocking. My mother kept smiling, her eyes cold. "Do not be dramatic, sweetheart. It is only love. It is just family, helping family." The golden grandson squealed from his mother's lap, and the audience chuckled as if on cue. I stared at my parents, realizing fully that this had been planned, staged, to trap me into obedience. They wanted me to either surrender and be applauded for my sacrifice, or resist and be branded selfish, ungrateful, disloyal. My brother looked down at his plate, not meeting my eyes. Thessaly's lips tightened, but she said nothing. Around me, the room shifted restlessly, waiting for my answer. The humiliation was not just in the request, but in the performance of it, the way they had orchestrated the moment to corner me, to remind me that I had no power, no voice. My pulse hammered as my palms grew damp. I could have screamed, then listed every sacrifice I had made, every time I had covered their debts, every time I had bent myself to fit their demands. But I did not. I looked at the audience, at the camera phones lifted at the people who had already chosen sides. I placed the microphone back on its stand, the soft thud echoing like a refusal louder than words. My mother's smile faltered just for an instant. My father's jaw tightened. Someone whispered, "She is really saying no." Another guest muttered, "Unbelievable. After all her parents have done." I smoothed the fabric of my skirt, straightened my shoulders, and smiled faintly. A quiet smile that said, "I saw them. I understood the game, and I would not play." The audience shifted uncomfortably, caught between loyalty and discomfort, between gossip and silence. The weight of their stares pressed on me as I stepped down from the stage, the humiliation clinging to me like smoke. I thought the worst had passed, that the public shaming was the climax. But as I crossed the ballroom, weaving through the tables, I felt the air change. My father was waiting by the dessert table, his hand already clenched around a glass, his posture rigid, his eyes fixed on me. My mother whispered something into his ear, her expression polished but her voice dripping with contempt. She did not hide her words. "She has embarrassed us. She will regret this." And in that moment, before his hand moved, before the slap came, I realized the performance was not over. It was only beginning, and the next act would leave a mark not just on my skin, but on the story of our family forever. The air seemed to thicken as I moved past the tables, the clatter of silverware and the polite laughter fading into a silence heavy enough to crush me. My father's eyes were locked on me, his jaw tight, his shoulders squared. He did not look like a man celebrating his son's birthday. He looked like a man preparing to deliver a punishment. My mother stood just behind him, the stem of her champagne glass balanced delicately between her fingers. Her smile never wavering, though her eyes burned with something closer to fury than pride. Guests turned in their seats, sensing a storm, but unwilling to move. I slowed my steps, hoping for a gap a moment to slip away, but there was none. My father stepped forward suddenly, his hand darting out, and before I could brace his palm, collided with my cheek once more, the sound sharp and violent in the stunned room. The force whipped my head to the side, and I staggered against the edge of the dessert table, my hand grasping for balance. The sting spread instantly, my face burning, hot tears springing to my eyes. Not from weakness, but from the sheer brutality of it. Gasps erupted from the crowd, louder this time. Roar! Someone whispered too loudly, "Did he just hit her?" Another voice shaky answered, "Yes." I got it on video. But no one moved forward. No one reached for me. The guests leaned back, shrinking away as though my humiliation might be contagious. My mother's voice cut through the murmurs, sharp as glass. "Ungrateful child. We gave you everything. We raised you. And this is how you repay us, refusing to help your own family." I pressed my palm against my swollen cheek, the heat searing into my hand. The golden grandson clapped his hands at the commotion, giggling innocently from Thessaly's lap, and the sound twisted in my chest. My brother did not rise. He did not protest. He stared down at his plate, his fork moving slowly through food he did not eat, pretending none of it was happening. Thessaly placed her hand over his, murmuring something I could not hear, her eyes flicking toward me once and then away, as if the risk of being seen as sympathetic was too high a price. I straightened slowly, forcing my knees to lock, refusing to crumble to the floor. I would not give them the spectacle of collapse. My chest burned my throat tight, but I held myself upright, each breath deliberate. Around me, whispers spread like fire. She must have deserved it. "No, this is abuse. Family business, we should not interfere." A man near the fruit table pulled out his phone, raising it higher to capture the scene. I turned toward the exit, my heels echoing across marble, and the crowd parted reluctantly, some stepping back as though I were carrying a disease. The chandeliers overhead glittered coldly, reflecting the redness blooming across my cheek like a brand. My mother's words followed me. "She is nothing without us. Nothing." I did not respond. I would not respond. Silence was my only shield, my only weapon in that moment. As I reached the door, a cousin called out weakly, "Someone should call the police." But no one did. Their voices trailed off into murmurs, speculation, gossip that would ripple through the family long after the party ended. Outside, the night air struck me cool and sharp, and for the first time in hours, I could breathe. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone, summoning a rideshare with trembling fingers. Blood had not spilled, but the violence had been clear, undeniable, witnessed by dozens. My reflection in the glass of the waiting car startled me. My cheek glowed an angry red, my eyes rimmed with tears I had refused to let fall. The driver looked uneasy as I slid into the back seat. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked cautiously. "Hospital," I whispered, my voice hoarse. The ride was silent except for the hum of the engine and the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. At the emergency room, the fluorescent lights seemed too bright, too sterile, their whiteness highlighting every bruise, every tremor. The nurse who handed me forms did not flinch at the swelling on my face. She had seen women arrive alone before. "Anyone coming to stay with you?" she asked softly. I shook my head. "No, just me." Her eyes flickered with understanding, unspoken but heavy. "You are not the first," she said quietly as she pressed gauze gently to my cheek. I sat on the stiff cot, staring at the ceiling tiles, feeling the weight of everything sink in. The physical pain was sharp, yes, but it was the humiliation that scorched deeper, the betrayal that would not fade with ice or time. Lying there, I knew this was not just one night's cruelty. This was the culmination of years of erasure, years of being pushed aside, years of being told I was nothing compared to my brother, compared to his son. The slap was only the latest chapter in a story I had been too afraid to end. The hospital discharged me just after midnight with a packet of instructions for swelling and a prescription I never filled because the pain in my body was not the kind medication could cure. I stepped out into the chilled night air, the parking lot lit by harsh lamps, and called another ride home. The driver barely glanced at me, though my cheek was still visibly swollen, a faint bruise beginning to bloom. When I reached my apartment, the silence inside pressed down hard, thicker than the sterile quiet of the hospital. I set my bag on the counter, sank into a chair, and tried to steady my breath. My phone buzzed again and again with notifications, but not one from my family. Not from my parents, not from Lazaro, not even from Thessaly. Instead, messages from coworkers and distant acquaintances flooded in clips of the moment already circulating online. Someone had posted the video. The shaky frame showed my father's hand rise and strike me, the sound audible, the crowd gasping. Comments scrolled beneath. Shock, disgust, judgment, and of course defenders who muttered that family discipline is family business. I deleted them, then deleted again, but the images would not leave my mind. The truth had been captured, yet I felt no vindication, only exposed as though my humiliation had been broadcast like entertainment. I showered slowly, wincing as the hot water stung the tender skin of my cheek. When I pressed a towel against my face, the reflection in the mirror stopped me cold. The swelling was bad, but bearable. What gutted me was the emptiness in my eyes, the reflection of someone erased piece by piece. I dressed in loose clothes and crawled into bed, but sleep would not come. Instead, memories marched through me. Times my parents had sidelined me, insisting that Lazaro's needs came first. Times when I covered bills quietly while they praised him for being responsible. The birthday when my name was forgotten on the cake, the holiday card where my photo was missing. I had convinced myself these were mistakes, oversights, but now lying in the dark, I saw them for what they were: deliberate erasures. The bruise on my cheek was not a single act of anger. It was the physical confirmation of years of dismissal. The weight of that realization pressed harder than any slap. I rose at dawn restless, my body aching with exhaustion. I made tea and sat at my kitchen table staring at the steam curling into the air. My phone vibrated again, another unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. A woman's voice spoke briskly. "Hi, this is Jeanette from HomeQuest Realty. Just confirming the walkthrough for 2 o'clock at your condo. We'll meet at the entrance unless you prefer we use the lockbox." My blood ran cold. "Excuse me, what walkthrough?" She hesitated, papers rustling. "Scheduled under your name. A Mr. Orville Sullivan listed as co-signer. Everything shows as confirmed. My father, my name, my condo." My throat tightened. "Cancel it," I said sharply before hanging up. My hand shook as I set the phone down. They were not content with humiliating me, with striking me in public. They were moving to take more, to strip away the only sanctuary I had built for myself. I remembered a week earlier when my father had mistakenly carried my bag out after dinner, smiling as he handed it back. I had thought nothing of it at the time, but now the missing spare key made sense. He had kept it. He had planned this. My breath came fast, shallow. The bruise on my cheek throbbed in time with my pulse, but this pain was different. It was clarity. They had no intention of stopping. They would keep erasing me until nothing remained. For a long time, I sat frozen at the table, staring at the condensation forming on my tea mug. The betrayal was no longer shocking. It was inevitable. And if I did nothing, if I stayed silent as I always had, they would succeed in erasing me fully. That realization, as terrifying as it was, carried something else. Resolve. I would not let them write me out of my own life. Not this time, not ever again. By mid-morning, I was already pacing my apartment, the walls closing in on me as though they knew what I had discovered. The bruise on my cheek had deepened to a dark flush, but I no longer cared about appearances. What consumed me was the certainty that my parents were moving to take my condo, the only place that was mine, the one space where their control had not yet seeped. I opened my laptop and stared at the blank screen until the cursor seemed to blink in rhythm with my heartbeat. Then I pulled up an old email address, one I had saved from a networking brunch months earlier. Marlowe Steinberg, an attorney with a reputation for handling complicated family disputes. I typed quickly each word, driven by adrenaline. Urgent. My parents are trying to sell my condo without my consent. They have a key I did not authorize. Can we meet today? I hit send before fear could stop me. Within an hour, he replied asking me to come downtown with any documents I had. I gathered everything I could find. Old wire transfers where I had covered bills for my parents' receipts from loans I had made to Lazaro, even the deed to the condo itself. My hands shook as I placed them into a folder, but for the first time in years, my shaking came not from dread, but from determination. When I met Marlowe, his office was cold and quiet, the kind of silence that felt steady rather than suffocating. He listened without interrupting as I laid out everything: the party, the slap, the staged humiliation, the phone call from the realtor, the missing key. His expression hardened as he examined the documents. "They've left a paper trail," he said, finally tapping the deed with his pen. "And they've underestimated you." He flipped through the pages again and looked up. "Do you realize you still hold legal ownership of the house your parents live in? You helped them during foreclosure years ago, but the deed was never transferred back. It's still in your name." I blinked, the words hitting me like a fresh gust of air. "You're certain?" He nodded. "Absolutely. You gave them shelter, but legally it's yours." The revelation left me momentarily speechless. The irony was brutal. The very people who had erased me from photos, who had branded me selfish, who had slapped me for refusing to babysit their golden grandson, were living under my roof in a house I owned. I leaned back, the weight of years shifting inside me. "File everything," I whispered. "I want every option on the table." Marlowe nodded. "We will start with securing your condo. Change the locks today. Document everything. And then we move on the house." By noon, I stood with a locksmith outside my building, the summer sun pressing down on the back of my neck. He studied the doorknob, running his hand along the scratches near the keyhole. "Someone's been in and out," he muttered. "The marks are fresh, like they were fumbling with a copied key." The confirmation chilled me, but it also solidified my resolve. Change everything, I ordered. Add a deadbolt, too. He worked quickly, the sound of drills filling the hallway. I leaned against the wall, clutching my folder of documents, listening to the whir of metal being reshaped. It was the sound of taking control. That night, I did not sleep much. I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by paperwork, highlighting, labeling, scanning, building a fortress of evidence. The bruise on my cheek throbbed, but I ignored it, pouring tea and scribbling notes, determined not to let despair swallow me. For once, my silence was not submission. It was strategy. Early the next morning, I opened a new folder on my computer titled Truth. Into it, I dropped dated wire transfers proving my financial support to my parents and brother, emails where my mother asked me to just cover the mortgage this one time, and text threads where my father insisted family comes first when demanding money. I added a saved voicemail from years ago, his voice booming, "You owe us. Without us, you'd be nothing." Each file was a stone, and together they built the foundation of my resistance. By the end of the day, I had also compiled screenshots of the video from the party still frames, where my father's hand was mid-swing, my mother's face smiling coldly, the crowd frozen. The world had witnessed my humiliation. Now I would ensure they witnessed the truth as well. Marlowe called that afternoon, his voice steady. "We have enough to proceed. The next step is formal notice regarding the house. They won't see it coming." I closed my eyes, imagining my parents' faces when the sheriff would arrive with papers, the way the walls of the house they claimed as theirs would no longer shield them. "Do it," I said. After hanging up, I sat in silence, staring at the bruise reflected faintly in the dark window. For years, I had swallowed their gaslighting, their erasure, their favoritism, convinced myself that peace was worth the cost of obedience. But obedience had only fed their appetite. Now, with every document, every lock changed, every legal step taken, I felt something unfamiliar but welcome settle over me. Power. Quiet, deliberate, undeniable. I knew the path ahead would not be smooth. My parents would rage, they would smear my name, they would call me ungrateful to anyone who would listen, but for once, their voices would not define me. The evidence would. And when the reckoning came, it would not be delivered in shouts or slaps. It would arrive in envelopes stamped and signed undeniable. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, hand-delivered by a sheriff who looked more tired than judgmental. He knocked firmly on the door of the house my parents had called theirs for 15 years, the house I had saved from foreclosure with money I could not spare at the time. When my mother opened the door, she was still in her satin robe, her hair wrapped in curlers, expecting perhaps a neighbor or a delivery. Instead, she froze as the sheriff spoke her name, confirmed her identity, and handed her the notice. My father shuffled in moments later, still in slippers, his voice rising like a storm as he demanded explanations. The sheriff remained calm, reminding them that the property title was in my name, that legal proceedings had been filed, that they were tenants now rather than owners. My mother's shriek pierced through the walls, echoing down the street. Neighbors peered through curtains, some stepping out to their porches to watch. The Golden family's secret cracks were now visible, and for once I was not the one being humiliated. I was at a distance sitting in Marlowe's office as he described the service of papers, his voice steady and factual, but inside me a surge of satisfaction burned. The humiliation they had designed for me at the party had reversed itself with precision. This was not a slap or a hissed insult. This was the law, cold and clear. Over the following days, the video of the slap continued to spread. News outlets picked it up, packaging it as a cautionary tale about family violence at a birthday celebration. A talk show replayed the footage, inviting experts to debate whether such behavior should be considered abuse or tradition. My parents had wanted to paint me as selfish as an ungrateful daughter. Instead, the world saw their cruelty framed in slow motion with captions highlighting my mother's words. "This is what happens when a daughter forgets her duty." The court of public opinion turned swiftly. Messages poured into my inbox, not of mockery, but of solidarity. Strangers shared their own stories of toxic families, of favoritism, of being cast aside for Golden siblings. For the first time, I was not alone in my narrative. I was part of something larger, a chorus of voices refusing to be erased. Lazaro attempted to intervene, calling me in the middle of the night. His voice trembled with a mixture of anger and desperation. "You've gone too far. You're destroying them. You're destroying us." I listened in silence until he paused, waiting for me to soften as I always had. But my voice, when it came, was calm, steady. "I am not destroying anything. They did this themselves. The only difference is the world can finally see it." He hung up without replying. Days later, my parents appeared at a community meeting, hoping to rally support, but the room was half empty. Those who attended avoided their eyes. The same neighbors who once admired their dominance now whispered about hypocrisy. The Golden veneer had cracked, and beneath it lay something the public could not excuse. Then came the hearing. I entered the courthouse not with bowed shoulders as I had after the hospital, but with my head lifted high. Marlowe walked beside me carrying files that stacked higher than my father's pride. When I stepped into the courtroom, I saw them seated at the defendant's table, their postures rigid, their expressions strained. My mother avoided my eyes. My father glared as though his stare alone could undo the legal weight pressing down on him. The judge reviewed the documents with the same steady patience Marlowe had shown me weeks earlier. Bank transfers receipts, the original foreclosure agreement, the deed in my name. One by one, the pieces fell into place, forming a picture no amount of gaslighting could distort. At one point, my father rose, pounding his fist against the table, shouting that family matters should not be decided by outsiders. The judge silenced him with a sharp rap of the gavel. "Family does not negate law," he said firmly. The room fell quiet. I watched as my parents shrank into their seats, smaller than I had ever seen them. For once, their voices did not fill the space. Mine did not in shouts or accusations, but in the quiet presence of truth supported by evidence. When the ruling came, it was clear. The house remained in my legal possession. My parents were granted temporary occupancy under strict terms, but the power had shifted. They were no longer untouchable. The slap that had once silenced me now reverberated against them in the form of public record and legal consequence. After the hearing, reporters waited on the steps of the courthouse. Microphones angled toward me, cameras flashing. My cheek had healed by then, the bruise faded, but the memory of it gave strength to my words. "Abuse, hidden under the guise of tradition, is still abuse," I said simply. "No one deserves to be humiliated, not in private, not in public." The crowd murmured, scribbling notes. For the first time in my life, my voice carried further than theirs. My parents left by a side door, shielding their faces from cameras, their once proud posture bent low. That night, as I sat in my apartment, I received a message from a woman I had never met. She wrote, "I saw your story. I left my family last year after years of being the scapegoat. Thank you for showing me it's possible to fight back." I stared at the screen, tears welling, but these were not the tears of humiliation. They were tears of recognition of knowing that my story had become more than my own pain. It had become a mirror for others, a crack in the silence that held so many hostage. Public consequences were not just legal rulings or viral videos. They were the shift in perception, the dismantling of the narrative my parents had built for decades. They had wanted to brand me as selfish, but now the world saw them for who they were. The golden family was tarnished. The scapegoat had become the witness, and I knew this was only the beginning. Weeks passed, and the storm that had shaken my family settled into a strange quiet. The video still floated online, still shared, still dissected, but its sharpness dulled as new scandals surfaced. My parents withdrew into themselves, their once constant social gatherings replaced by shuttered curtains and unanswered doorbells. Lazaro busied himself with work, avoiding me entirely, though word drifted back that his perfect facade had begun to crack. I, however, found myself breathing differently. The weight that had pressed on my chest for decades was still present but lighter, as if I had finally set down a burden I was never meant to carry. One evening, Marlowe handed me the final papers confirming full uncontested ownership of my condo and the family house. I signed them slowly, savoring each stroke of ink, feeling years of erasure peel away with every signature. When it was done, he looked at me with quiet respect. "You've taken back your story," he said. Those words stayed with me as I planned my own symbolic closure. I returned to my condo with a small box I had kept hidden for years filled with old photographs and keepsakes my parents had once demanded I throw away because they ruined the family image. Inside were childhood drawings, a bracelet from a high school friend, a photo of me holding a science fair ribbon they had refused to display. I spread them out on my living room floor, surrounding myself with pieces of the life they had tried to erase. I chose one photo in particular, a picture of me at 12, smiling brightly in a dress my grandmother had sewn long before the golden grandson took center stage. I placed it in a frame and set it on my mantel where it belonged. Then I did something I had never dared before. I invited friends over, not family, but people who had stood by me quietly over the years. We shared food, laughter, and warmth in the very space my parents had tried to steal. At one point, someone asked about the bruise that had sparked it all, and for the first time, I told the story without trembling. "They wanted me erased," I said, my voice steady. "But I am still here." My guests raised their glasses, and for a moment I felt the weight of generations loosen further. In the weeks that followed, I also visited the house my parents still occupied under the new legal terms. I stood on the sidewalk looking at the building I had once considered a prison and a refuge all at once. They saw me from the window, my mother's face pale, my father's expression tight with unspoken words. I did not go inside. I did not need to. The symbolism was enough. The house was legally mine, but more importantly, it no longer held me hostage. The cycle of control was broken. On the walk back, I noticed children playing in the street, their laughter carrying in the evening air. It struck me that life continues always, even as families fracture and rebuild. Perhaps one day Lazaro's son would grow up and question the pedestal he had been placed on. Perhaps he would see what his parents could not. Perhaps he would break the cycle too. For my part, I had no desire for vengeance beyond what had already been achieved. The law had spoken, the public had seen the truth was out. What remained was not anger, but clarity. Toxic families thrive on silence, on scapegoats accepting their roles. By refusing silence, I had reclaimed myself. The final step of closure came quietly. I donated boxes of my parents' belongings that had been left in the condo, things they had insisted were family heirlooms, but had only ever symbolized their dominance. The act was not cruel. It was freeing. In their place, I filled the shelves with books, art, and memories of my choosing. My space became mine in truth, not just in deed. On the first morning I woke in that uncluttered space, sunlight streaming across the floor, I realized I was no longer waiting for approval, no longer fearing disapproval. I was simply living. And in that simplicity lay victory. Looking back, I understood the slap at the party had been the breaking point, but also the catalyst. It had forced the truth into the open, propelled me into resistance, and led to justice. It had scarred, yes, but it had also revealed. I thought again of the girl in the framed photo smiling with her ribbon. She had deserved protection, love, celebration. For years, she had been denied those things, but now at 30, I was giving them to her myself. Closure was not a single act, but a series of choices, small and large, that together stitched a new life. The epilogue was not about their downfall, but about my beginning. And so when people asked later how I had survived such a family, I told them the truth. I stopped surviving. I started living.